What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday morning edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, which means we are discussing fantasy football, previewing the fantasy football week to come. And there's only one person to do that with, and that is the one, the only, the Swami of Konami himself, Mr. Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
What's going on, brother? We made it. We're on the halfway point of the NFL season. We're moving downhill now, and I say downhill. Kind of almost literally. We're getting two quarterbacks potentially out for the year now. We're in that point of the season where we're just starting to get guys shut down. Teams are packing it in, and we're starting to see some of those things start to happen.
Yeah, I was gonna say I stay moving downhill, so I don't really know. I don't really know what you're talking about. It is funny. There's like this weird, you and I have been doing this for so long. There's this weird mental thing about when it gets into the double digits that you're like, oh, we're almost done, but we're not really, right?
Yeah.
Like there's still 9 weeks left. Like we're literally halfway through. But there's this weird kind of thing in your brain that you think, okay, I guess we're rolling down to the end. What I will say is that the end of the fantasy season comes, much, much more quickly than the end of the NFL regular season. So we're running
Mhm.
into that area, especially, depending on what competitions you're in. I believe Scott Fishbowl finishes in like week 12 or something like that and heads to the playoffs. And so yeah, we're getting close. We're getting
Yeah,
close there
FFPC.
to the end.
Yeah, it's all
Yeah,
that.
FFPC for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're getting in there and close. And so certainly an interesting time of year. You mentioned at the top, and I think this is really the first thing we need to discuss, and that is we've just got some. I don't know if it's breaking news. I don't know if because I don't even know if it's really news, but it seems like Trevor Lawrence is not going to play in Week 10. That is the breaking news. That is the news. But what's interesting to me about this, and we could talk about that from like Minnesota is going to be very popular in DFS. Can the Jaguars push them? We could talk about it, from that perspective for sure. But I the other side of these reports that seem like very ominous, like we're just not going to see Trevor Lawrence again this year. It's interesting kind of that we've gone from, all right, Wednesday, we'll see what happens, to like, is he out for the year? It's just a very weird situation.
Yeah, I don't know much about the severity of the injury, but it seems like he has a shoulder injury. So, I mean, if you can't play, then what are you gonna do? They're 2-7, right? Like it's like this
Yeah,
thing is
fair
like,
enough.
if he's gonna be playing not 100%, then maybe they just shut him down and they try to regroup, lick their wounds, try to reset. They already traded, Cam Robinson last week. I mean, it's just a lost season for the Jaguars, and we assume that they'll probably move on from Doug Peterson. At this point, they probably just let him finish out the season, I would assume, at this point. But it was just a disappointing year for the Jaguars, and they're gonna have to kind of reset things this offseason. But for the rest of the season, it's really we were really down to just two players for the Jaguars. We were kind of focused on for fantasy football right now, as basically Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram. The backfield's turned into just like an absolute quagmire, and we had
Nightmare,
seen
a
like the
nightmare.
writing. Yeah, we had seen the writing on the wall for this like a month ago. It's just that we had like ETN miss a couple of games, which kind of allowed Tank Bigsby a larger role. But with ETN back, we've seen he's also, the last two times he's played, he's made a mistake that's led to him getting benched, and then Dearness Johnson's played more. So I think we're really still looking at just Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram. They did sign Mac Jones this offseason. I think a lot of people forgot like Mac Jones is like a football player, but they do have Mac Jones this year kind of coming in, and at least he's like a viable player. So
Yeah.
I assume Mac Jones will at least be able to get us the Evan Ingram targets and like let us run into some stuff with Brian Thomas Jr. It's unfortunate for Mac Jones because I think like from a talent perspective, there's more talented players on the Jaguars roster than where he left New England, but this is a sinking ship.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, if the team just doesn't care anymore, then like, I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure what Mac Jones is going to do about it. The other part, so it was interesting, kind of a precursor to this. I take care of like the available free agents article on Sharp Football Analysis. Great website, go and check it out. And I saw that the Jaguars had signed C.J. Beathard. Again, C.J. Beathard, let's say, you spell your name Beathard. Your name's Beathard. We're calling him Beathard. But either way, CJ Beathard, they had signed him off like Miami's practice squad, brought him back. Obviously, he'd spent some time with the Jaguars. And I kind of raised my eyebrow at that. And now we hear this come out. And I believe
Mm-hmm.
the wording from Ian Rapoport was that like he was considering all his options. And you're right. Like everything we're reading here is it's just not great. I will say that, Parker Washington, we'll see what happens. I think the usage we saw from him last week was promising, but as you wrote in the worksheet, which everybody should go read, Rich's worksheet columns, which are available at Sharp Football Analysis, previewing every game, every single week, every single fantasy relevant player, all as part of our fantasy package. You can get for 20% off using promo code Angles. So go and do that. But as you wrote in that, about the Jaguars, we saw pretty good uses from Parker Washington, but we also saw him used outside a lot. Is that going to continue when Gabe Davis gets back? We would assume, relatively soon. Or are they just going to be going to lean? Parker Washington's a young guy. He seems to be at least reasonably talented. Do they just want to see? So it's an absolute mess. And then the backfield, you mentioned it. I mean, I don't know what to do with the backfield at this point. Like, it doesn't seem like any of them are even playable, especially in this matchup. And it's just, yeah, it's a rough spot. I am interested, though. Obviously, we're going to be interested in Vikings this week. We're going to be interested in Sam Darnold, and we're going to be interested in Justin Jefferson and Aaron Jones, and we can even get to Jordan Addison. Got a nice little bump in targets, kind of a squeaky wheel situation last week. Maybe even T.J. Hawkinson, given how bad the Jaguars are to tight ends. But is this one of those weird spots where maybe we're not going all in on them, or maybe are we just using Aaron Jones exclusively because we don't know how much the Jags are going to be able to push back this week?
I mean, I still think we're starting quarterbacks against the Jaguars. Like, every year we get to a point where there's just the defense that we target every season. Like, we always get to them. Last year it was like the Commanders, where just like we got to a point where you just like played a guy against the Commanders every single week. And the Jaguars have kind of been that Huckleberry. Like, we've been moving in this direction, like where you just play your guys against this pass defense. They tend to play a lot of aggressive defense too, which is like plays right into our hands. They blitz a lot. They play a lot of man coverage. So we're going to continue to, I think, play Sam Darnold. We'll be excited here. I mean, Sam Darnold's a guy that's been hyper efficient in the touchdown department anyways. And then you play Justin Jefferson and you play Aaron Jones, right? Well, like that triumvirate is still like guys we want to attack. And then you get your matchup based guys in Hawkinson and, Jordan Addison, who are still like more fringy guys. I think we'll see Hawkinson continue to ramp up. I don't think he's like an auto start. Obviously, if you picked him up and you have a fringe guy and you're chasing a touchdown, I think that's fine this week. But I mean, this defense has just been so bad that I'm not running away from it. And like I said, I think Mac Jones is still viable. Like, I don't think like this is a team that's going to score 0 points. Like, I think like they actually have some serviceable players. I think Mac Jones will and also be serviceable. So it's not like they're just going to be like a complete zero.
You heard Rich. Our Vikings full stacks are still alive and well this week. Can't wait to be duped by 20% of the rest of the lobby.
I mean, listen, you play Mac Jones now, $4,400 Mac Jones. Are you ready?
I can't. Man, I'm a degenerate. I don't know if I'm that big of a degenerate. I don't know if I'm getting that far down. All right, let's get into talking about some of the stuff we had planned on talking about. Before we do, I do want to mention we do this every single week on Thursday at 11:30 Eastern as part of our YouTube channel over at Sharp Football Analysis. Or go to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You'll find it. You can subscribe. You'll get notified whenever we go live. Go and check that out. If you're listening to this as a podcast, keep downloading. We really appreciate that. But you can get in here live. You'll get involved in the chat, and that would be, we would appreciate that as well. All right, let's move on to real or fake. And I was reminded heading into the podcast that I've been going pretty quickly through the real or fake introduction, and we have not gotten the image up on the screen. So you on YouTube, congratulations, you're getting the greatest image. Is this the best podcast image that's ever been made? I don't know if there's ever been a better one.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Teddy Swoelsevelt and Konami Code. Here we are. What a time to be alive. Let's talk about going from this high. Let's talk about the low of the Cowboys offense without Dak Prescott. You mentioned 2 quarterbacks that might be out for the year. It seems like the news we're getting on Dak Prescott's injury, at the very least, we know he's on injured reserve and out for a long time, but he's probably done for the year. And so if we're playing real or fake, we're kind of thinking, okay, what are we doing with this Cowboys offense? But if we're talking about the Cowboys offense, I guess really, what are we doing with CeeDee Lamb? Like, because that feels like the only part of this offense you even want a piece of moving forward with Cooper Rush at quarterback.
Yeah, and we saw Cooper Rush start 5 games. I mean, also, how long does Cooper Rush start, right? And maybe he just gets to run out, but we are heading into a spot where they traded a draft pick for Trey Lance, and he's going to hit free agency. So, do they give him any type of look over like these? Assuming Dak Prescott's out.
Do you know what would be the most amazing outcome if the Cowboys, for whatever reason, give Trey Lance some type of Chuba Hubbard extension out of nowhere. And congratulations, Chuba Hubbard. Get your money, and obviously they're trying to maybe build a backfield coalition there with Jonathan Brooks whenever he gets back, and we'll see how that goes. And Chuba Hubbard's been very good. Not get your money, whatever. But like it was kind of out of the blue, and that would be so funny if they like give Trey Lance 2 years out of the blue, and they like let him start. Like that would be the most Cowboys thing ever. That'd be the most Cowboys thing ever after trading a 4th-round pick for Jonathan Mingo. So there you go. That would be a wonderful that'd be a wonderful series of events that I would love. That'd be so fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Cowboys fans have had a rough run out here this season, and it looks like that's just going to kind of continue over these final 2 months of the season. But when I was looking at Cooper Rush's starts a couple years ago when he started made his 5 starts with the Cowboys, and they went 4-1. I mean, that was a good defense. They were able to control game scripts, and he didn't really throw. I mean, they were 31st in dropback rate in the span that he was starting. That's not going to be the case this time. Like this defense, and obviously they can get Deron Bland back and Micah Parsons finally, but this is still a defense that hasn't been able to stop the run, even with Micah Parsons on the field. We just expect them to be in like negative game scripts too. So they're not going to have that luxury of just kind of like play ball control offense with Cooper Rush. And when he did take over that 5-week stretch, I mean, we did see he targeted Lamb, on 33% of his throws. So if we get some more volume there, at least like there's a chance for him to be a volume-based producer and maybe kind of hang on and still have some spike week opportunities. Now, we always talk about like the past year and a half, we've seen this repeatedly play out where said alpha wide receiver gets backup quarterback, and we have to live in like this realm of volatility. We saw it with, Jamar Chase with Jake Browning last year. We saw it Devontae Adams basically the whole season, Garrett Wilson all of last year, DJ Moore had like that span with Tyson Bagent. Anytime these guys get attached to backup quarterback, we just have to price in a level of volatility. And I think gamers already were kind of feeling the squeeze of not getting the full run out of what they feel that they paid for CeeDee Lamb at the top of fantasy drafts this year. Probably not going to recoup that initial value. But I mean, he does have double-digit targets in his past 3 games. I think that he's probably going to be a target-based producer. I think like probably a lot like Devontae Adams was last year. I think that we're going to run into some spike week opportunities, but probably some volatility as well. Probably more on like that wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 line, which feels like expanding. Like it feels like we just don't have the elite wide receivers that we had a year ago due to injuries, and it's been really tough on that group this year.
Yes, except for Justin Jefferson.
Yes.
That's the one guy everybody was like, I don't know about him, with Sam Darnold. That's our king. And so so here we are. You talked about the offense as a whole, the defensive issues. This is not going to be the same as it was when he was starting those games and they went 4-1, which I think is all true. I think there'd be a lot more volume. I mean, the backfield, this had been a stay away. We did finally get that Huddle run out last week with Ezekiel Elliott suspended for for whatever reason, missing practice, late to meetings. I'm not even sure. I don't even remember. But we finally got that Rico Dowdle run out. He's had reasonable games when he's gotten the chance, but we don't know what's going to happen with Zeke. We don't know when he comes back what we're going to see. Are they really willing to go and kind of give Dowdle that kind of workload? And then this offense as a whole, I mean, you're just not that excited about. So it's tough. And then the other side of that, and you may mention this in the worksheet, and I think it's important for people to realize, this Eagles defense has just been flat out good for several weeks in a row. Not like, okay, we're improved, just flat out good. And so it's kind of a tough spot they're in this week.
Oh yeah, for this week in particular, I mean, I think you're really basically down to Lamb or like Dowdle as like just because you have some buys and you just have to throw a guy at the RB2 wall. You would hope that Dowdle, especially at the state of their season, they just kind of let him just see what happens the rest of the season and then reassess the position. Will that happen? Remains to be seen, but I think that they should. I mean, you do get that, at least that Cowboys, if you're someone hang on to some of these players, like you look at those 2 games in the playoffs where it matters most, right? Like week 15 at Carolina, week 16 Tampa Bay. Like you at least say if you have Lamb or Dowdle or maybe even Jake Ferguson, that like, hey, maybe they come through when it matters most. If you get there with those guys, though.
As Dan also put in the chat, we could get our Jonathan Mingo at running back, which that's the future. And Michael Toops,
probably
I
done for like
that.
a guy like Jalen Tolbert, though. I mean, we're probably gonna get Brandon Cooks back, if not this week, then
we're
next. Yeah, pretty cooked there, I think.
Yeah, no, we're done on the Tolbert, which is sad. The Brooks, if you were in a deep dynasty league like I am, and you had like hoped on Jalen Brooks, like that's done. I think we're done on all of that. But I do want to mention, I do want to shout out Toops here. Still tipping, starts playing. Absolutely would grain I'm gripping. I would. What a heaven that would. You could tell by week 10, I'm kind of out on on football this week. Like it does seem like we have some good matchups this week, but it doesn't really seem like exciting. And I wonder if it's just me knowing that I'm gonna have to wake up early on Sunday morning to watch that Giants Panthers game that has just completely destroyed all of my excitement for this week. That might be it, because there are some good games. We're gonna talk about some of the games. Dolphins Rams, great game. Lions Texans could be a great game. We'll talk about it. 49ers Bucs could be interesting, right? There are lots of interesting stuff that could happen here, but like I feel like for whatever reason I can't get revved up for this for this. Do you feel the same way?
Well,
No,
yeah.
you feeling great?
No, yeah. I mean, I'm excited for the games. I'm still excited for football. I mean, maybe not that Sunday morning game, but just because of the timing, right? And I'm on East Coast. So one time it actually is beneficial to watch football on the East Coast is probably that Sunday morning.
Yeah.
I still
I
remember the
do.
first year they did the Germany game and they sent the Seahawks over there, and my initial thought was like, what about all the people in Seattle? Like, yeah, it's like what, 6 a.m. over there?
Six
Like, what?
6:30. Yeah, 6:30 start.
What are we doing? At least
Yeah.
they're sending East Coast teams over there now.
I'm just telling you, as somebody who for many years has woken up to watch Aston Villa lose at 8 a.m. My time, that it is not a fun experience. And so waking up to the Giants Panthers, I don't know. I think
Yeah,
it's
the
got me. All right,
days are
let's move
just
on.
long. Like I remember I think it was the first London game, because remember that was, I think, the Steelers
Oh,
played the
the overtime.
Cowboys and they
Yeah.
delayed the game too. And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
we've been watching football for 24 hours, man. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, it wasn't overtime, right? It was a delayed game that like it was so late. It was hashtag East Coast dads were really struggling on that day. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Colts. I think there's some interesting things here with the Colts coming out of Joe Flacco's first start. Seems like he's going to get a second start here, and so we'll see what happens. I think one of the most interesting. I mean, we talked about Josh Downs. We can keep mentioning Josh Downs. I think we're in based still on his target share. We'd like to see better from Joe Flacco, but I think we're in on that. We
Mhm.
still obviously don't know about Pittman. He's still dealing with that injury. He was a DNP on Wednesday. We'll see. But I think the running game aspect of this, which you brought up in the worksheet preview for this game, with Jonathan Taylor and on a very small sample size, to be fair, but the struggles that he's had with Joe Flacco, I think those are really interesting.
Yeah, and it's again small sample size stuff, but we've always seen that when these running backs get to play with mobile quarterbacks, their efficiency per touch does rise in the run game because of the RPO game, right? You when you have a player like Anthony Richardson on the field, you still have to defend his ability to run the football. And you can't, when you play a guy like Joe Flacco, like you remove that element of the offense. And we've only seen 29 carries from Jonathan Taylor with Flacco on the field because he missed that section of the couple of Flacco starts, but he's only averaging 3.8 yards per carry with a 17% success rate on those runs compared to a 42% success rate with Anthony Richardson and 5 yards per carry. Now we do have a sample of Jonathan Taylor, playing with, stationary quarterbacks. He's a good football player. That yards per carry is going to rise. He's going to break off some big runs, but there still is a non-zero chance removing the element of Anthony Richardson's threat to run. Like that is a negative also on Jonathan Taylor as well. You could say, well, Flacco targets running backs, and he did have a season high 5 targets last week. But, Jonathan Taylor also is another guy that's proven like he's not going to stack a ton of receptions. Like he's just not that type of player either. So if we remove some of the rushing efficiency for him, it does kind of element some more fragility in his range of outcomes as well. You like the target share still for Downs. I mean, Sunday night was a reminder. It's funny because these two guys are playing each other on Sunday. Josh Downs, very much like Khalil Shakir, who's the most efficient Buffalo wide receiver, doesn't play 100% of the dropbacks because of the role he plays in the offense. And that's what we have, still Downs. He still led the team in targets and was the most effective player per targets, but, he was still only on the field for just under 70% of the dropbacks. He's still not a 100% player. And for fantasy football, that does still matter a little bit. It does come into play. It just kind of, forces you to be, hyper efficient and to max those things out. But it's kind of funny that those two guys are playing each other because Shakir is also the same. He's been consistently the best wide receiver on Buffalo as well. But I still think you're happy with the target share. Michael Pittman just seems like he's not going to be healthy maybe the rest of the season, like playing through this back injury. And now he's got like a finger deal. Maybe they get Adonai Mitchell some more reps over here the remainder of the season. But I still feel like pretty confident that Josh Downs is still like the one piece in this offense that has like a floor and still upside that you're kind of willing to be excited about still the rest of the way.
You mentioned Khalil Shakir's efficiency. He has fallen off the last 2 weeks. He only has an 88.2% catch
They
rate
threw an
over
incompletion
the
to him.
last 2 weeks. Unbelievable that he's missed 2 of his 17 targets over his last 2 games.
Amon Ra's
Khalil
picked them
Shakir.
up. I don't think Amon Ra has an incompletion over like the last 4 weeks.
It's really crazy as we dive into kind of this new, shorter passing kind of thing that we're seeing with some of these guys. It's just we're getting that Michael Thomas efficiency back, by the way. Michael Thomas, keep doing what you're doing on Twitter, my man. I'm a big fan of everything. I was a big fan of you in college. I was a big fan of everything you did for all my dynasty teams, and I'm a big fan of this Twitter era we're in, Michael Thomas. So so
Twitter in general,
continue.
like you've seen it, obviously it's become more abrasive over time, but like these full players like just come out and just dragging Derek Carr. I saw someone tweet that, Chris Olave is going through meeting all like the neurologists and the specialists. And I saw someone said like everyone's recommending he just doesn't play with Derek Carr.
You gotta watch out. I wasn't gonna specifically mention it. We're gonna get blocked by the Carr family again. I think they went through and unblocked everybody, right? But we might all be blocked again. I can't remember. Let's let's talk about another disappointing situation, and that is DJ Moore. And I guess the real or fake question here is that DJ Moore will never ever have another big game. Is that real or fake? Because I feel like that's. I mean, he's not doing anything. I guess even asking for a big game might be a bridge too far. Like just a wide receiver 25 game might like that'd be enough at this point with him, right?
Yeah, but we saw this even with JSN a little bit last week. Like when you're still getting volume and you run into matchups, like you kind of have to throw these bullets still. Not that you like are forced if you have an alternative to start against DJ Moore, but I mean, I think there's at least like an intriguing case still for him to be used in DFS this weekend too. If you can like muster up the courage to play any type of Bears passing game pieces. I mean, he's still out there. He signed the extension this offseason. It's been disappointing. And like we knew this was well within the range of outcomes. One, playing with a rookie quarterback, and then two, the Bears drafting 2 other players that could potentially earn targets. The one thing about this situation that is a little bit different than other situations is the Bears have veteran guys like Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. Like these guys aren't just going to like go away like into the night, like, and just be like, cool, like you're going to take away our targets. Like that's like, these aren't the types of players that are going to do that. But he's still playing a lot. He's still getting targets. He's not getting a lot of accurate targets. The Bears have 3 wide receivers in the top 10 in an accurate target rate. Caleb Williams is the worst quarterback in terms of inaccurate target rate to wide receivers outside of Bryce Young. Only Bryce Young is worse. So that's not going very well. The offensive line is bad. But I mean, if like we've seen like guys like Cortland Sutton bounce back the last couple weeks, right? After like a 4-week stretch where he did nothing. These guys that are still getting targets, and we know that they're talented players. I mean, you can't just completely leave him for dead, but obviously it's been like as disastrous of a run out as you could have expected this to start this year.
I didn't want to interrupt your run of like really, really good information, but like as you're going through all of that, I go, that's really but other than that kind of situation that you just
Other than that,
laid out for the, but other than that, everything's great. Like
but that's how
that's
you
a
win.
wild
Like
run
the
out.
guys like
Yeah.
DJ Moore, like are how you win like tournaments, right? Like,
Yep.
like Jackson Smith and Jigba last week, right? Like everyone sees like he plays the game without DK Metcalf. And we even wrote in the worksheet last week, it was his highest target share in a game since week 2, most yards per out run since week 2. And he's getting this opportunity. People are like, same old JSN. Like they were a bad offense. And that's how you win tournaments, right? Like you look at this Bears situation this week, they're 7-point home favorites against the team that just allowed 18 fantasy points to Mason Rudolph, right? Like this would be a spot to say like, hey, it's been absolutely awful for the Bears. They look like it's because these 2 weeks since their bye, it's been miserable. But this is an objectively good spot for them.
I haven't actually looked at kind of ownership projections this week. What do you think about? I mean, DeAndre Swift, I would assume, is going to be much more popular than the passing game as well. And so, like, if you're really trying to get a a spot at this, yeah, you go with Williams, you go with DJ Moore, maybe Rome Odunze. I do like a little bit of kind of what we've seen
Mhm.
out of Rome Odunze the last couple weeks. So there's something there. Not Cole Kmet,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. I mean, listen, you're
River,
not a full-on commit, like, I'm not telling you to go all in and put your life savings on a bear stack, but, like, we always do this in fantasy football, and I've been doing this for over 10 years, writing up every player every week. And it's easy to kind of look at and say, like, all right, well, this is what's been happening. That's going to continue to happen because that's why we do things like the worksheet and focus on opportunity and matchups and those types of things, because it opens the door to take advantage of some of these spots where it's like, dude, this guy's been terrible for a month. He's going to continue to suck.
yeah, because a month is 4 games, and 4 games is a very small sample. And so, yeah, I think it's a good point. It's something to point out for sure. We're going to move on, talk about some game previews here. Before we do that, I did want to look at some of the comments here. Just traded away Kamara and Flowers for Neighbors and Ken Walker. PPR thoughts? Well, you've already made the trade, so I don't understand what you want from us. But I
He
do
wants
think
conviction. Just pat him on the back. Say, yes, you did well.
I do think he did well. I do think you actually did. Because Kamara is getting massive workloads right now, and that is likely going to continue with everything we have in New Orleans. I think you do have to question, like, how good is this offense going to be just top down, but also, like, how long are we going to continue to see Alvin Kamara get 27, 28 touches a game? Like, is that the kind of
The
thing that,
reports on
that
the
we want?
Kendra Miller thing are hilarious too. Like, so I
Find
imagine they're going to be
someone.
in a because they're going to be in a position right when he comes off IR. I think it's December 8th or something. That's all he's eligible. They might be still have 2 wins, and they might just say, we've already given Alvin Kamara 260 touches this year.
Exactly.
We signed Kamara to a 2-year extension too during the season. Like, let's not burn him up. Like, let's not burn him out and just let Kendra Miller kind of take on some more work for the final month of the season. That definitely exists in the range of outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, Kamara just being your running back one and your wide receiver one is going to be. I mean, it's
I mean,
going to be tough
38
on him. But obviously,
opportunities last week.
it's just wild. It's just really wild with him. I do want to say though, I do think Neighbors feels a little bit like a buy low right now
Oh
because it
yeah.
hasn't been good coming out of him coming back from the concussion. It hasn't been like bad, but it just hasn't been great like we were experiencing early in the season. But the opportunities are still there, and we know who he is as a player, and so
Great playoff
that's why
schedule too, potentially. I mean, your Ravens, Falcons, Colts, like 3 teams we've been absolutely crushing with wide receivers.
Yeah, no, I think yeah, I'm really in on Neighbors. I have him on a few teams. I'm excited to kind of ride this out and see where we go. One more, I'm deep at running back. Should I trade Kamara or Breece Hall for Tyreek? I'm gonna leave that with you.
Well, I don't think
With
it's up to
we're gonna
you,
talk.
right? I think
Yeah,
you ask the gamer who they want.
yeah. There you go.
We do this all the
But
time, right? Like, yeah.
you would make either of those trades though for Tyreek.
Yeah, if you're deep
Tyreek
at running back and
also,
you need a wide receiver, I mean, just it
yeah,
makes sense. Like, that's the ballpark, right? I mean, I would say if I had the choice, I would choose Brees Hall for the reasons, or to keep Brees Hall for the reasons we just said with Kamara. Short term, I think Kamara is going to continue to be incredible, but I do worry like the final month of the season and the range of outcomes if like they're cooked and he's just had such an immense workload because they're invested in him now for the future that just like they do scale back and we do see some Kendra Miller at the end of the year. Because that
yeah,
report
and I'm
where Kendra Miller's actually healthy and Dennis Allen put him on IR, Dennis Allen definitely hated A.T. Perry and he definitely hated Kendra Miller.
yes, as I tweeted last night, find someone that loves you the way that Dennis Allen hates Kendre Miller, because it's not even like reports from the locker room. This one kind of is, right? But like some of the quotes we've seen since they've drafted Kendre Miller that Dennis Allen said about him were just wild quotes that you wouldn't expect to hear out of a coach about a player ever, like even in the worst situation. So he hates that dude. I don't know what Miller did. Like I don't know where this comes from, but yeah, he's out on that dude. I am interested in the Tyreek side of it though, because we're going to talk about this Dolphins and Rams game, and you actually wrote a lot about Tyreek in that Dolphins Ram game. Dolphins at Rams, Rams -1, 50.5 point total. So obviously, a really big total. It is on Monday night, so this isn't going to be part of any of the DFS slates. I do think it's a really interesting game to discuss,
Oh yeah.
and you expressed a lot of optimism about Tyreek Hill in the worksheet kind of write up for this game.
Yeah, especially this week. But I think big picture too, we have the half season sample, so we've all obviously had Tyreek Hill only has one top 30 scoring week. It happened all the way back in week 1, but obviously we have a section of the season that's largely thrown out based on the Tyler Huntley and Mike White and Skylar Thompson sample size, and then we've only had Tua back for 2 games after 1 3/4 of a starts, and Tua's basically, so he started 4 games. 2 have been against the Bills, who have been really good against wide receivers and push targets to running backs inherently. And then obviously he started against Arizona, who a team that plays really passive defense, a lot of too high defenses, but Tyreek still had 9 targets in that game. So I'm still pretty optimistic that the sample size that we've seen just with Tua is still relatively small and influenced by 2 games against Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills. I do think that we're going to see these wide receivers get targets as the season goes on. Now, we do have a larger sample that shows that Tyreek Hill has just out-targeted Jalen Waddle when the two have played. But also, I mean, Jalen Waddle's not going to have a 13% target share. Like, we're not going to get to week 18 and he's going to be there. That's also not going to happen. But I do have a lot more confidence in Tyreek Hill because he's just outright out-targeted, Jalen Waddle since he's joined the Miami Dolphins. We kind of seen something similar like with the A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith splits too. And it looks like A.J. Brown is going to play this week. It looks like maybe Devontae Smith will play. So maybe the continued run out of not getting all 3 of Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith continues on the field. But this particular matchup for the Dolphins, I think, does open the door for both these wide receivers to get involved in this game. I mean, obviously, we saw what JSN did against the Rams last week and Tyreek Hill did against the Rams. And that's something that's been ongoing. For this particular matchup, I think it's really interesting because the Rams have made a turnaround defensively over the past 5 weeks, and it's been predicated on their young pass rushers, getting pressure on the quarterback. But when they haven't gotten pressure on the quarterback over that sample, they've still been a bad pass defense. And we know the Miami Dolphins offense, when Tua's under center, is predicated on just you can't pressure Tua because the ball's out. It's literally the thing. Like, the offensive line has never really been good for him, but he gets rid of the ball so damn fast that he doesn't get pressured. He's actually last in the NFL in pressure rate because of that. So is this Miami offense now, the passing, going to be able to operate on script because they're not getting pressured against the pass defense that has been vulnerable on vertical targets as well? This is a team that plays a lot of zone coverage, a lot of cover 3. So they've been getting absolutely crushed by wide receiver targets on throws 10 more yards downfield and 20 yards more downfield. That's kind of the bread and butter of where this passing game wants to attack. So I'm very excited to kind of see this game on Monday night, how it plays out. And then obviously the Rams side, we've seen the turnaround that they've had when they have all 3 of these guys available. Puka, Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and Kyren Williams. It's been one of the better offenses in the NFL going back to last year. We did lose a half of Puka Nacua last week, but this offense now, we have a lot more confidence going forward than where we were when Stafford's throwing balls to Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell for, a 5-week stretch.
NFL players, please stop trying to punch other players wearing helmets. That seems like, just knock that off. That doesn't seem like a good idea at all.
And the Miami defense too in that game, like we've seen now, because you look at the top down metrics of the Miami defense, and we have to also remember they had a 5-week stretch where they were awful and teams just didn't have to throw on them. And now we've seen since Tua came back and they're like a viable offense, that the defense probably is not nearly as good as their metrics kind of showed either.
Yeah, no, this 50.5 total, when I saw it, I didn't blink at it once. I do think that this is going to be that type of game, in prime time. I hope that's the kind of game we get. I do think your point about the Rams defense, first of all, I just have to make mention of this, and this isn't really the kind of thing we talk about on this podcast, but what the Rams have been able to do through the draft to rebuild this defense, and the hit after hit after hit after hit they had in the draft, sometimes not even with like premium draft picks, is really really special and really something that they should be commended for, because this defense is really taking a step forward. But as you mentioned, a lot of that's predicated on this pressure, and so that is what makes this interesting. You also talked a little bit about Waddle being not getting a ton of targets. He's actually behind, obviously behind A-Chain. We know what A-Chain's been doing. He's also behind Jonnu Smith in targets with Tua Tagovailoa on the field. Like, that's kind of the range we've seen Waddle fall to. That seems unlikely to me to continue.
Yeah.
There is you mentioned kind of the matchups that we've seen, especially those two Buffalo matchups that could have maybe funneled some targets to Smith. But we have seen Jonnu Smith get a lot of targets. So this is a undeniably good matchup for tight ends. And so if you're really trying to like build showdown lineups around this, Jonnu Smith is certainly somebody I'm going to be targeting here, with the understanding that it's good that he's been on the field. It's good that he's been getting targets, but we could see this shift moving forward. And it's possible that a lot of what we're basing A-Chain and Smith on and Waddle on and kind of what we've seen was based on small sample with a common opponent twice. And so
Mhm.
maybe we need to, I don't know, at least consider that as we're going into this game.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you like about Johnny Smith is that he's just playing more, though. Like that's what it is. Like I am 100% with you. We talked about this with Jalen Tolbert when he had the breakout game on Sunday night, and that aforementioned game we talked about where the Steelers played till 1 a.m. against the Cowboys, and it's like, well, how many games is he going to out target Jake Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb? Turns out, not again. For the sample we've seen since, and I do think that big picture, like I definitely do not expect Johnny Smith to end up with more targets than Jalen Waddle. I definitely do not believe that's going to happen. But we have seen him play more. He's been over 70% on the field of Tua's dropbacks now the past 3 games. Well, not even two or Tua's, one wasn't. And in the first 5 games that never happened. So he's starting to get on the field more and distance himself from the kind of Julian Hills and Durham Smythes that we saw working in. Could that kind of come back maybe with more running scripts? Maybe we see them play some of those guys, but you're happy that he's at least on the field and gives us another bullet to throw at a matchup or in showdown. Because of the teams that are on bye this week, it actually is a decent tight end, bye slate. Because, you look at the guys that are on bye and it's like, oh, people were playing Tucker Kraft. They obviously were playing David Njoku, and they obviously were playing Brock Bowers. It was a significant hit for tight ends this week and gamers that will probably need bodies this week.
Yeah, I mean, there are no good tight ends, so does it even matter? But no, you're right about that. You also mentioned this Rams offense has been better with Kupp and Nacua together. Obviously, we didn't get that for the full game last week, but you had some interesting numbers in there about kind of what we've seen from a target perspective with these two guys, when they're playing together. And also, by the way, I wrote up Demarcus Robinson in the waiver column this week because I had to. He scored 4 touchdowns in 2 games.
Yep.
You have to write about him, right? That's just the way that it is. But like the target numbers we've seen for Robinson, that is, I mean, I will full fade him in showdown, and maybe it bites me because he does score touchdowns. This
He
is
does.
something that we've seen going back to last year, right? We've seen him be involved with both of these guys healthy as a touchdown scorer. That's why you drafted him in, best ball, if you drafted him best ball, which I did on a few teams. That's the theory of the play, was that he was going to have some of these random games show up where he scores 2 touchdowns. And we've seen that. But if he's not going to score that touchdown, it's going to be a lot of goose eggs, a lot of 1 for 15s too. And so, yeah, Robinson aside, some of these numbers we've seen with with Kupp and Puka Nacua together are interesting, kind of based on how high can we really rank both of these guys.
And it's still, again, a very small sample that we've even had those guys, on the field this season. Going back to last year, Puka's had the slight edge, but they did cannibalize each other. I mean, I go back to the wide receiver tiers that I wrote up this offseason, and I didn't have Puka in the elite tier because of his splits with Cooper Kupp and playing with another, target earner. And that was like, he was in that group of guys that played alongside other, good guys, because those guys don't have the full run out to get like the 30% target share. They can get it in a game, but it's not like a weekly thing, right? And that's what we're going to kind of see. I think we're going to see some oscillation where this ends up being a Puka game. This game ends up being, a Kupp game. But I think by and large, when we get to the end of the season, we're going to look at the sample size they played together and say they probably combined for 55% of the team targets, right? And there's going to be games where they can potentially get 60 to 70%, like we saw like the Jets receivers get last week, where it was Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. So there's definitely be those spots too as well. I think they both kind of live at like that wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 line. We'll run into some matchups that offer like a signal to say like, hey, chase Kupp this week or chase Puka. This one doesn't really have a clear line in that regard. You can say maybe the Dolphins have Jalen Ramsey outside, but like, I mean, we're not scared of Jalen Ramsey anymore, right? Like we're like beyond those days. I mean, we just saw Marv get him 2 weeks ago, and Marv's had 2 good games all year.
Random shots for Marvin Harrison, just catching strays on the podcast.
I'm so mad. I mean, listen,
apologize.
Petzing did the stuff again, man.
Yeah. No, we apologize collectively to Marvin Harrison Jr. because I don't want Marvin Harrison Sr. to be mad at me. So we apologize, Marvin Harrison Jr. for any strays you may have just caught.
We're
All right, I
not
do want
trying
to
to
talk
catch
about.
strays.
No, that's I wasn't going to make the joke, but yes. That's where we are. Uh, all right, we're going to talk about the 49ers at Bucs here in a second. I do want to mention every single game this week has been written up by Rich. It's part of our worksheet previews that he does every single week, previews every single fantasy relevant player in every single game. That's part of our fantasy package. Also part of our fantasy package, by the way, if you have start sit questions on Sunday morning, you can get into our subscriber only live chat with Rich every single Sunday morning at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time. It's a great way to go in there and get all those questions answered. Obviously, he does rankings, he does DFS picks. All of that's available over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can use promo code ANGLES to get 20% off that package. So go and make sure you check that out. All right, let's talk about 49ers at Bucs. Probably should have talked about this game first, but we kind of got in that Tyreek Hill thing. This is obviously, it's a big game. The Bucs are 6.5 point. I mean, excuse me, the 49ers are 6.5 point favorites. It's got a 15.5 point total as well, which you like to see. But obviously the big story here is Christian McCaffrey. We expect him to come back. The question is, how much are we going to see from him if he comes back, and kind of how is this backfield rotation going to work with Jordan Mason and Garendo? Are we going to get the full CMC experience here in this first week?
I'm not expecting it. I wasn't expecting it coming into this year either before we even knew he had the Achilles thing. I kind of wrote about this in the tiers too, going back to like offseason stuff. Is I go back to last year, and I don't think the plan was ever to give him the amount of touches he had. Like, obviously, I didn't mean like they're going to do a backfield by committee or anything, but the backups, the reserves for the 49ers last year were so banged up that they really couldn't get any of those guys on the field, Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason last year. And I always thought coming into this year that they were going to have more of an opportunity to alleviate McCaffrey's workload. Obviously, then he has the Achilles, things like a wrench gets thrown in things. He's coming back in the middle of the season. But what they were able to kind of discover while McCaffrey was out is that Jordan Mason is a viable player. Isaac Garendo can be a viable player. And I think that those guys will allow not only the ramp up for McCaffrey, but also spots when McCaffrey is back to being like fully ready for his full workload, that they can get him off the field in spots where they can, like later in games when they're winning, which didn't really happen as much last year because of the state of their backfield. So I do think this particular game, as he starts this week, I would express just a smidge of caution of saying like, yeah, he probably is not going to get the full CMC, like 25 to 30 touches. I do believe he's going to play in high leverage spots where I think McCaffrey, you're the most excited about McCaffrey. I think if you have him, you're just playing him anyways. Because this 49ers team, through natural regression being part of it, has just been awful in the red zone this season. I mean, they've went from first in the NFL in red zone conversion rate, which again, their natural regression, they probably were going to shed some of that, but they're 28th this year. They've really struggled in the red zone. CMC led the NFL in fantasy points in the red zone last year. This is in just a very clear spot to say he can fix one of the issues that this offense has had, especially scoring, because they still get to the red zone a ton. Like this 49ers team, although they disappointed, like this offense has been fine with all the moving parts. Like they're moving the football. They're just not closing drives. And that's what a player like Christian McCaffrey, getting him back on the field, can help you do. He's going to get those high leverage touches. He's going to be involved in the passing game. And I think he's really going to be involved in the red zone early on as he ramps up. They can use Jordan Mason between the 20s. If they get ahead in this game, they are 6.5 point favorites. They can use Jordan Mason to beat up the defense late in games. That's what I think we're going to see with Christian McCaffrey.
What I heard is that we're back live with Christian McCaffrey anytime touchdown bets. That's what I just heard. We're back live betting that at whatever it's going to be. I haven't even looked this week. I bet it's minus 225 or something wild like that. So, but we're live. We're back. We're back with that. You mentioned Elijah Mitchell, and every time I think about Elijah Mitchell, I saw him actually on an IR spot for one of my dynasty teams, and I think there was a back-to-back seasons where I thought that I had hit big on James Robinson and Elijah Mitchell in back-to-back seasons, and that hasn't worked out, Rich. It hasn't been what I expected. What has worked out for the 49ers,
you had Chuba Hubbard, you made out. That's who you need.
Chuba. Oh, minus 215 CMC anytime touchdown from producer Matt. Hey, look at that. Almost hit it right on the nose. We do need to talk about Brock Purdy, because you mentioned this offense has been still moving with all the moving parts at receiver. Brock Purdy is very likely going to have Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Jauan Jennings, and Ricky Pearsall this
Hmm.
week. That's not obviously, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and Brandon Ayuk, but it is healthier than they have been, especially in those couple of games before the bye week. And this is obviously just a fantastic spot for Brock Purdy.
Yeah, Brock Purdy's probably the biggest winner. Obviously, CMC gamers getting him back is a win, but Purdy gets that added weapon. It was kind of like last week when we didn't see a lot of Deontay Johnson, but it's really good for Lamar Jackson, and I think that this is obviously a big spike for Purdy, who still is like when you look from like a yards per attempt stance, he's still third in the NFL in yards per pass attempt. He's still been efficient, and we know that this touchdown rate has been kind of the bugaboo for him. I mean, he went over again. Natural aggression was always going to happen. He's had over a 7% touchdown rate the previous 2 years. I believe no player's ever had 3 years in a row of 7%. You don't need 7%, but he's at 4% now, 4.1%. So if we can get that just kind of back in like the 5.5 like range, he's gonna be a guy you want the back half of the season. They said they're getting in the ball in the red zone a ton, and then he's getting this Bucs defense that awoke the ghost of Patrick Mahomes. Glad we stuck with that one last week, and Mahomes got there for his highest scoring game of the season. Tampa Bay is now 30th in passing points allowed per game. They've allowed a QB1 in 6 of their past 7 games. The only guy was Spencer Rattler in his first career start that didn't get there. They've allowed 4 quarterbacks to be top 3 over their past 5 games. Again, Rattler, the only other guy. That includes Patrick Mahomes, who hadn't had a top 6 scoring week since the middle of last season, almost a full calendar year. So really good spot, I think, for Purdy and this 49ers team to just come out of the bye and put up a lot of points.
Then kind of, related to that, like I said, it seems like the receivers are going to be healthy. You have any thoughts, any kind of projections on, we know what Deebo Samuel is going to do without Brandon Ayuk. We have a pretty good idea of, what Kittle's going to do with kind of one of those top 2 receivers out. And we've seen that play out throughout the entire season. You also have some great stats about Kittle against the blitz, which you should go read. Everybody should go read in the worksheet, and why that could be a big deal this week. But that kind of Pearsall and Jennings, when both of them are healthy, do you have any strong takes on kind of who we're going to see emerge in that number 2 receiver role, which is so important because the 49ers don't play 3 wide receivers as much as other teams in the league do?
Yeah, they're 28th and 11 personnel on passing plays. We talked about this a little bit with Deontay Johnson last week too. Like what gives. We could see that rise a little bit potentially, but we have a pretty large sample of Kyle Shanahan. Like Kyle Juszczyk's going to play. This is inherently as a team that's just not going to play a lot of 3 wide receivers compared to the league base rates. I still do lean Jennings. I do think that this injury opened the door for him, and it's not like Pearsall's been like I don't think Pearsall like he was that good enough to just say like he didn't relegate Jennings. And Jennings, when he's played, has been so good. He also got a contract extension. Like we know the staff believes in him. He was before his injury was averaging 2.8 yards per out run. That was only by Nico Collins, AJ Brown, and Justin Jefferson. Obviously, a lot was weighted by the Rams game where nobody played except for him and Brandon Ayuk. But even if we remove that, he's over 2 yards per out run, which is 25th among all wide receivers. This has been an efficient player. He can be an efficient player, and he's done everything this coaching staff has asked for. So I still think Jennings on a veteran team that's looking to come out of the bye and turn the season around and really kind of like start propelling downhill. I still think Jennings is going to have the first crack to be that wide receiver too.
Moving on to the Bucs, I mean, Baker Mayfield had back-to-back do not practices to open the week, but is allegedly fine. It seems like they're just kind of taking it easy with him coming off of an overtime game,
And
and
teams seem
so
to be getting smarter with that too. Like of just
absolutely.
we saw Tony Pollard last week, who's literally just been getting 20 carries every week, and the Titans were like, "What if you just don't practice this week?"
Yeah, although I do think he was back to limited on yesterday, so we're back to it. I will say so, like off of overtime, a Monday night overtime game the next week, I have bet against that pretty consistently for lots of years, and so I do like the 49ers in kind of in this spot. But if teams are getting smarter and maybe resting guys a little bit, then maybe we'll see. But for the Bucs, like in general, from a fantasy perspective, the wide receiver situation is a mess. We know that Kate Otten is going to get targets, but this is one of the toughest matchups, if not the toughest matchup for tight ends in the league. And the backfield is just again, I'm not going to say the word that I was going to say, so we'll say mess again. And like we don't know what we don't know what to do with any of these. It's just been such a kind of hard situation to kind of, deal with. Hopefully they go to their bye. Hopefully after that we get Mike Evans back, so at least we can trust Mike Evans here. But other than that, this is just a very, very tough situation to parse.
Yeah, I was talking to my son this weekend. I remember Scott Fish ran a league, I think 5 or 6 years ago, where you didn't draft players, you drafted team units. So like you would just have Tampa Bay running backs, and like that would be, you would just get the points for those. And it was really cool to see like how they were valued and like the structure of like the team. Like Detroit running backs would be like one of the top pick, like maybe the first pick you would make this year.
That's number one pick. That is number
Right?
one
Like you would be
overall
like,
with a bullet. Yeah.
and I was like, man, someone should have brought that back this year. What a year to have that. Like we could have really used that. 'Cause it feels like there's just so many of these backfields. And hell, we saw the Chuba Hubbard extension. Like, is that what we're going to be? Like, are we trending towards that being a thing too with them? But the Buccaneers are like the case for this. Like, because now the running back situation like that, since Godwin and Evans have been injured, they're just throwing guys at wide receiver because McMillan's been banged up. We saw Raheem Jarrett lead the team in routes run last week. Ryan Miller gets a touchdown. They're just throwing all the dudes at the wide receiver spot. And we know Otton's going to get targeted, but again, Fred Warner's on the field, man. And I know that the targets are going to be there, but the 49ers have faced Travis Kelce. And when he was ripping off in this midst of Travis Kelce's run, where he's second in the NFL in receptions since week 4, he only had 4 catches for 17 yards against the 49ers. Trey McBride only had 53 yards against the 49ers. Jake Ferguson, 23 yards, doesn't quite have the target share of Otton. So I will say I expect the targets to be there for Otton. I'm not benching him, in season-long leagues at all. But I do think from a DFS perspective, if you've been someone that's just hammering Otton in DFS, this might be a week to kind of pull back off of that.
I do want to let you know that you just said a correct statement, but a wild one, which is Jake Ferguson does not have the target share of Kate Otton, which is that's the world. That's the world that we live in. And yeah, you mentioned the backfield. We don't even really need to go deep into it. I will say, with the Bucs as underdogs here, with everybody healthy on the San Francisco offense, we're going to expect them to really be able to push it. This could be a game that leans a lot more towards Rachaad White and kind of the passing. So maybe that's kind of something you think about if you're trying to find run backs in this game. I mean, Sterling Shepard did not practice on Wednesday, but he did take over that slot role. And so maybe he's not on the field as much, but he's probably going to get more targets when he is. So maybe that's a way you can play this game from Tampa side. But yeah,
I would play either of those guys over. I would play either of those guys over Otton if you're forcing a bring back in this game. I don't necessarily think you have to, but DraftKings pricing is really tight this week. I would say Sterling Shepard at least is interesting. The 49ers are number 1 in the NFL in yards allowed per target to outside wide receivers, but they're dead last in yards allowed per target to slot receivers. So if you are fishing for someone, I don't think you have to force it, but that does exist.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was with that as well. And again, we have to see if Shepard plays, although I think he followed a very similar practice thing, last week, and he's obviously a longtime veteran. That is exciting, at least. I will say about this situation, seeing Sterling Shepard back. Yeah, I'm excited about that. He may even made some old some Sterling Shepard catches where you're like, how did you do that kind of catches? Which I hope people go back. Go just look at Sterling Shepard Giants highlights because he was
a prospect. He was, as a college prospect, he was a good player.
Yeah, I think he might, obviously he's not wasn't a great receiver or anything, and obviously had the injury issues, but I liked him. He was an interesting receiver. I always liked watching him play. We don't have a ton of time to talk about Detroit at Houston. I do kind of want to discuss it a little bit. We obviously don't know what we're getting from Nico Collins. I will say a guy coming back from injured reserve, not practicing on Wednesday, tells me that he's not going to play this week. And so we'll see. I do think it might be time to have a conversation though about CJ Stroud and kind of what we're seeing from him and what we're seeing from this passing offense in general. Cause it has not been good in recent weeks.
Yeah, and this always existed in the range of outcomes. When you draft these guys that are predicated on just passing efficiency, you have to run pure, right? Like we saw this happen with Justin Herbert for a couple of years, where like the things kind of deteriorated around Justin Herbert, and that's what's happening to CJ Stroud, right? The wide receiver rotation is kind of we've seen guys in and out of the lineup. He hasn't played with all 3 of these wide receivers and won't play with all 3 of them because it's Stephon Diggs' injury. The offensive line the interior offensive line particularly has been an issue, and it's kind of impacted his play, of just not running as pure as he did last year. That's a bummer, right? But that's the lesson you guys got to learn about these guys. I'd rather miss on 1,000 Anthony Richardsons than draft a guy like CJ Stroud highly for fantasy football, because the range of outcomes for like to hit the ceiling is just easier for the guys that for the runners, and they usually have more insulation as a floor too. So just something to kind of always earmark. We'll see what happens. With his ADP where it resets next year. We want Nico Collins back though. I mean, obviously his splits with Nico Collins are really seismic, but I don't see how you can handle him as anything more than a QB2, especially with this matchup with the Lions adding a pass rusher too in Zadarius Smith this week, even though they've still been getting pressure without Aiden Hutchinson too as well. And Texans have just been giving up tons of pressure. I mean, he's been pressured on over 40% of his dropbacks in each of the past 3 games. It's just all falling apart. It's all falling apart there.
I was really surprised at how well the Lions have continued to get pressure without Hutchinson. And then, like you said, they added Smith. Darius Smith's a very good pass rusher, has had a lot of success even this year, even though, he's getting later in his career. So yeah, that's a big deal for them. We'll see how much he plays with a lot of these defensive guys, a lot of these trade deadline guys. We don't know Marshawn Lattimore. We don't know how much he's going to play, how much that affects it. And he even has I think an injury now. And so, yeah, we have a lot of questions, but certainly a lot going on there. Another guy coming back in this game that we do have to mention is Jameson Williams, who's coming back. We'll see kind of how all of this shakes out with the receiver room. You have any thoughts on kind of, I guess, Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta as we get these guys back in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I like the spot for Amon-Ra. Obviously, we've seen like the targets not be completely there versus last year. You would hope that we get Nico too to help push this game. And the Lions have been so good, and they've had so many weird games where they just haven't needed to throw. Hopefully, we get some pushback and get like the vintage Amon-Ra games, right? Like if you look at the games where he's gotten a lot of targets, it's the close games the Lions have played. So that's what we're looking for. Jameson Williams had already kind of like delved into, became kind of like just a big player, nothing player. He hadn't had more than 3 catches in a game since week 2, but still kind of would get you that I might get a 50-yarder. If he does play, this would be a spot. I mean, receivers have 20 catches of 20 or more yards against the Texans. 10 of those have been touchdowns, the most in the league. We saw that again. They give 3 more to the Jets wide receivers last week. They don't give up a lot of plays. It's funny because they're number 1 in completion rate allowed, but when they give up plays, man, they give up home runs. So if you're going to chase a home run, objectively a team to chase it against.
I would bet that number 1 in completion rate against. I bet that goes down a little bit this week against.
Yeah.
I don't throw incomplete passes, Jared. Jared Goff. I would suspect we get that as well. I do also want to mention you had one of this note in the worksheet that I thought was interesting. The Lions dominate in the first half and the Texans get dominated in the second half. That feels like a bad combination if you are a Texans fan and hoping for the best in this game. But obviously we'll have to see. The other part, Jahmyr Gibbs is something else, man. That guy, so much fun to watch, so good. He's one of those like situations where obviously if David Montgomery's not there, like Jahmyr Gibbs is just like the running back 1, like, right? Like that's where we are. He's just so much fun to watch. He is the type of player in fantasy that I do not gravitate towards. Devin A-Chain was kind of like that as well. And both those guys are going to look like misses because of and I'm going to have to change kind of my view on them. And I'm slowly starting to do that. And I do have them in a few leagues, obviously, a few best ball leagues, but like, I am so predicated on volume, and we see over and over again how important volume is for running back success. We've seen it with so many running backs already this year. J.K. Dobbins is a great example of that. And so volume is really still king. And so, you have to kind of weigh it. But like some of these dudes with Gibbs and how good he is, with A-Chain and how good he is, especially A-Chain, if he's going to be like the wide receiver 2 on the Dolphins. Yeah, it's fun to watch. I'm excited about.
Yeah, I changed that
obviously
approach a couple years ago with Austin Eckler here. Just because in context of where the NFL is right now, obviously we want all our running backs to get 20 touches a game, but we talked about it. Look at the backfields we've already covered so far that have turned into messes, but no one's really getting that run out. Like the amount of bell cows have shrunk every year, like in this current version of the NFL. And it's opened the door for these guys like A-Chain and Gibbs to be really fantasy viable on 180, 240 touches because there just aren't the number of guys pushing 300 touches that there were when you and I grew up and were taught to chase. Like, hey, we want a running back that just gets the ball every play. Those guys being a more finite resource have made these guys more fantasy viable. And just something to kind of to put into context of why these guys are now really good for fantasy football, just even outside of the efficiency.
Yeah, shout out to Rudy Johnson if we're talking about volume.
Yes.
Shout out. I hope you're doing well wherever you are. You gave me a lot of good games. By the way, I think about this a lot because I really like this player. What would CJ Spiller be in the league today? Like, think of how good he would
Yeah.
be in this league. Oh, that would be amazing. Also, shout out CJ Spiller. You were amazing to watch. All right, let's move on to Uncut Gems. In this segment, Uncut Gems, we try to talk about players that maybe aren't rostered in a ton of leagues, that maybe you're not thinking about starting, that could be good starts. I will forewarn you that after a really good start to the season, after a really great, let's say, first 7 weeks, the last 2 weeks haven't been good. We got to bounce back, Rich. It hasn't been the strongest performance for me specifically over the last couple of weeks. So
I got to
tell
put
me
a
who you got.
moratorium on Jalen Coker. I just can't. I got to stop. I'm a martingale-ing Jalen Coker.
So who do you got this week?
Not even for the bit equity, which I know this provides, but I've got Noah Brown.
Oh yeah, that's what I looked at him. I looked at him this week, and I didn't want to make it a thing where I like it seemed like I was
No,
getting
I
excited
think
about
it's
Noah
more
Brown.
fun. I think it's more fun coming from me. Not like I said, not even for the bid equity. There's been a couple times this year where Noah Brown's had targets, like a high target rate per route run, but just never has had the routes. Like there was a span a couple weeks ago where he was a popular DFS play, and I even wrote in the worksheet, I'm like, it was going into the Carolina game, and I'm like, man, he was still only on the field for 60% of the dropbacks. Like it's the opportunity still not fully there. He's getting targets, but now we've seen him run a route on 81% and 76% of the dropbacks the past 2 games. The first time this season he's had a route rate of over 70%, 75% back-to-back games. He's been a wide receiver 4 or better in the past 3 of his past 4 games. Obviously, 1 came with a Hail Mary. But in this particular matchup, and well, one thing before I get there too is even though we've seen Terry McLaurin have the best year of his career, we're not seeing these Terry McLaurin games where he gets like a 35% target share. Like he's not getting just peppered with like a ginormous amount of targets. The ball's still getting spread around. So he doesn't really have to contend with that too. Like this alpha wide receiver, just like smoking all these, gobbling up all these targets. But in this particular matchup, I'm very interested in Noah Brown because the Pittsburgh Steelers have been very good against opposing wide receiver ones. They're number 2 in the NFL in points allowed per game to opposing wide receiver ones. And what that has done is push some production to wide receiver 2s. Jalen Tolbert in the game we talked about, 7 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. Josh Downs, 8 for 82 and a touchdown. Remember Josh Reynolds? He played football this year. 4 catches for 93 yards against this Pittsburgh Steelers. Darius Slayton, when we last saw them play, went over 100 yards in that game as well. They all had top 30 scoring weeks against the Steelers. I do think this is a game when you look at the Commanders, I don't think they're going to be able to run the football as effectively as they have this season. I think it's a run game that's capable of still being effective on the ground, but I don't think they're just going to steamroll the Steelers as well. So I'm expecting a little more passing volume here. So not even for the bit equity. I had some actual reasoning behind this, but I do think this is a week to finally dabble into the Noah Brown waters.
I put him in the waiver column, and I had to like question myself if I was just doing it for the bit, if I was over optimistic. But you're right. Like you look at the trend lines of usage, and we've seen this already this year, and we've seen randomly Zacchaeus show up or Luke McCaffrey show up and take it. So we'll see as he continues to get this. And as you said, some of this production recently was on a Hail Mary, so you take that for what it is. But I do think you're right. Like the actual being on the field numbers we've seen are promising, and so we'll see if we get the full Noah Brown experience. I do like that UI and Curtis, or Sharp Football Analysis own Curtis Hirsch, drafted a best ball team at FFPC that's not doing great, but it does have Noah Brown down there, just doing his best, trying his best to bring us out of the bottom half. So thank you, Noah Brown, who I think I drafted almost as a bit. I believe we drafted that team, or I drafted him after.
Yeah, you
we had
guys
already had
after the
that
rant.
conversation.
After the rant, you guys are so vehemently. And like I said, I never was against Noah Brown, the player. It's just that in the
Sure.
course of a fantasy football season, a lot of guys like Noah Brown come up. Like
Yeah, no, you're right.
less
You're
less
100%
so
right.
than running
Yeah.
backs, which is where you want to have these. You want to look back end your bench, especially in fantasy drafts, with these running back dart throws because they just don't become available on waivers where you can get a Darius Slayton for a week. You can get Sterling Shepard, like these guys that can just you can punch in at wide receiver. Like just they come up a lot more than running backs, and that was the whole crux of my argument. It never had to do with Noah Brown, the player, but I thought it would be special to bring him up this week, not just for the bit equity, but I actually think it makes sense for those reasons I laid
Yeah.
out.
No, I agree. I will say about the running backs, to your point, because you're right almost always. Running back waivers this year have been awful. Like we just have not seen. I mean, part of the reason is why you know we haven't seen the running back injuries that we normally do. We've seen a bunch of wide receiver injuries, and so that's part of the reason why we've seen kind of some of these guys that some of these, fantasy players that do really well, kind of drafting more in the receiver heavy, haven't done as well this year. It's just been an odd year from that perspective. And obviously the offseason will be spent with, hundreds of think pieces written about why that might be. And I can't
Oh, I
wait
can't
for it. I
wait.
can't wait to read all of them. Oh, how exciting that'll be for everybody. My Uncut Jib, as we move on, is Taysom Hill. Obviously only in places where he can be used as a tight end, but we did see that usage spike last week. He had 5 targets, 4 for 41. He had 5 carries for 19 yards and a touchdown. He had 35 snaps. As we, mentioned earlier with Alvin Kamara, they're going to have to find a way to get somebody other than Alvin Kamara involved. Jamal Williams might be back this week, so we'll see. But I think we're going to continue to see Taysom Hill involved a lot in this offense just with all of the injuries. And I think, if you're trying, like I tried to get cute with Mason Tipton last week, and that obviously didn't work out, didn't catch any of his 3 targets. And so, if you're trying to get cute with these wide receivers with Cedric Wilson, if he plays, we'll have to see what his injury is. Or even if you're trying to get cute with maybe Foster Moreau or Jauan Johnson, I just don't even think that's the way to go. I think you're focusing on Kamara, and if you can play Taysom Hill at tight end, you play him there. And Taysom Hill is actually available in a lot more leagues than I expected him to be. So Taysom Hill at tight end, if you need, like you said, it's kind of a tough week at buys for tight ends. He's someone you can go out there and grab. And I think you even wrote in the worksheet you would start Taysom Hill over Kyle Pitts. So like
I did.
that's how confident you are in him this week.
Yeah, especially from the usage stance of how they use. I'll go a step further on Taysom Hill. I think if you're in a super flex league, there are actual quarterbacks I would play him over. I think I would play him over either Tennessee quarterback. I would play him over
Yeah.
Bryce Young. Uh, that's probably like a smaller list. But you also maybe are in a tough spot in a super flex league where you had Dak and didn't get Cooper Rush on waivers, or you aren't going to play Mac Jones, right? Or you had Jordan Love that's on a bye, or just something happened to you, right? I do think in super flex leagues, he's viable. I actually almost ranked him as a quarterback. I probably should go back and at least slot him in for gamers that have that option. But from a tight end perspective, I think he's actually like just a complete like mid-range to potential like front end tight end 1 because of the state of this offense. I think like the Tampa Bay wide receiver situation, what it showed us a couple weeks ago is that we don't have to necessarily look for an answer amongst the Saints wide receivers. We can just look at Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill as being kind of the guys. And the way he played a season high 35 snaps, he played 4 at quarterback, 7 at running back, 10 at tight end, 10 in the slot, and 4 at wide receiver last week. Like he is the flex. Like he is an actual flex player in the NFL. I called him last night on a podcast, Jose Akendo of the NFL, for anyone that's old enough to know who Jose Akendo is. But yeah, I think Taysom Hill is like just a downright like actual good play. I think he's going to be a big part of the offense, at least for the short term.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And also, I mean, just like his equity around the goal line. Um, he had 2 rushing touchdowns in the reverse of this game, right? Before he left with injury. That was this game, right?
Yeah, it was the Falcons game.
So yeah, and so so there's a lot there for Taysom.
And
All right.
also, I mean, he had the rushing touchdown. Alvin Kamara had 30 points in a game without a touchdown. That's like really hard to do in fantasy football.
Yeah, if you get 40 touches, as it turns out, it's it's the way to get there. All right, that's it for us. We're gonna take this home. We really appreciate you listening to us. If you're listening to this podcast, first of all, we appreciate it. Rate and review. If you are listening to the podcast, however, you can go over to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You subscribe, get into the weekly chat, just find out when we're live, show up for the live show that Warren Sharp will host on Friday. All that stuff available at YouTube. Remember to head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com to access all of Rich's work for this week, his worksheet previews, previewing every fantasy relevant player in every single game. It's part of our fantasy package, which you can get for 20% off using promo code ANGLES. Make sure you take advantage of that, and we will be back to talk with you next week.